Good afternoon, juniors. Today we're going to be reading Young Goodman Brown by Nathaniel Hawthorne. And while we are going through that, I'd like you to have out your vocab so we can review the meaning when we come across a word, and also your analysis questions. Because some of these we will be working on as we read along. Others you'll be responsible for on your own. Also, please annotate, as always. Please annotate the text. This is a longer story, but I think you'll enjoy it. It's also an allegory, which is a story on two levels. You have the literal story and then the kind of message behind it. So I want you to pay attention to the characters and the symbols and sort of try to identify what their deeper meaning is. Also consider human nature and what Hawthorne could be suggesting about human nature as we read. So, let's start. Young Goodman Brown by Nathaniel Hawthorne. Young Goodman Brown came forth at sunset into the street at Salem Village. This is the same Salem that we read about in The Crucible. But put his head back after crossing the threshold to exchange a parting kiss with his young wife. And Faith, as the wife was aptly named, thrust her own pretty head into the street, letting the wind play with the pink ribbons of her cap while she called to Goodman Brown. "Dearest heart," whispered she, softly and rather sadly, when her lips were close to his ear, "prithee, put off your journey until sunrise, and sleep in your own bed tonight. A lone woman is troubled with such dreams and such thoughts that she's afeard of herself sometimes. Pray, tarry with me this night, dear husband, of all nights in the year." "My love and my faith," replied young Goodman Brown, "of all nights in the year, this one night must I tarry away from thee. My journey, as thou callest it, forth and back again, must needs be done twixt now and sunrise. What, my sweet pretty wife, dost thou doubt me already, and we but 3 months married?" So we know that already that young Goodman Brown has something that has to be done. It's got to be done this evening, and it has to be done somewhere between late at night and sunrise. And he is so far 3 months married to his wife, who is called Faith, and her name, Faith, will be important later. "Then God bless you," said Faith, with the pink ribbons, "and may you find all well when you come back." "Amen," cried Goodman Brown. "Say thy prayers, dear Faith, and go to bed at dusk, and no harm will come to thee." So they parted, and the young man pursued his way until, being about to turn the corner by the meeting-house, he looked back and saw the head of Faith still peeping after him with a melancholy air, in spite of her pink ribbons. These pink ribbons are mentioned a lot already, and one of your questions asks you to explain how these are symbolic. So when you think of pink, what sort of things come to your mind? Probably innocence, um, childhood, girly, nothing really malicious. "Poor little Faith," thought he, for his heart smote him. "What a wretch am I to leave her on such an errand! She talks of dreams, too." Methought as she spoke there was a trouble in her face, as if a dream had warned her what work is to be done tonight. But no, no, 'twould kill her to think it. Well, she's a blessed angel on earth, and after this one night I'll cling to her skirts and follow her to heaven. So now we know that whatever errand that Goodman Brown is running is something that he's a little ashamed of, and he is not aware that Faith, his wife, knows what it is. He thinks that if she knew what it was, she would be very upset about it. So whatever it is, it's not something good. But he says, after tonight, I shall be cling to her skirts and follow her to heaven. I'll be very good and righteous. With this excellent resolve for the future, Goodman Brown felt himself justified in making more haste on his present evil purpose. He had taken a dreary road, darkened by all the gloomiest trees of the forest, which barely stood aside to let the narrow path creep through, and closed immediately behind. It was all as lonely as could be, and there is this peculiarity in such a solitude. The traveler knows not who may be concealed by the innumerable trunks and the thick boughs overhead, so that with lonely footsteps he might yet be passing through an unseen multitude. So the path he takes is like a forested um, path, and it's very dark. Excuse me. There may be a devilish Indian behind every tree, said Goodman Brown to himself, and he glanced fearfully behind him as he added, what if the devil himself should be at my very elbow? His head being turned back, he passed a crook of the road and looked forward again. Behind beheld the figure of a man, in grave and decent attire, seated at the foot of an old tree. He arose at Goodman Brown's approach and walked onward, side by side with him. You are late, Goodman Brown, said he. The clock of the Old South was striking as I came through Boston, and that is full 15 minutes agone. Faith kept me back a while, replied the young man with a tremor in his voice, caused by the sudden appearance of his companion, though not wholly unexpected. I want you to underline or highlight those two little paragraphs, the one where the traveler says, you are late, and Goodman Brown replies, faith kept me back a while, because we're going to look at his statement of faith in two ways, the literal faith and then a figurative faith, like your faith in a religion or such. It was now deep dusk in the forest, and deepest in the part of it where these two were journeying. As nearly as could be discerned, the second traveler was about 50 years old, apparently in the same rank of life as Goodman Brown, and bearing a considerable resemblance to him, though perhaps more in expression than in features. Still they might have been taken for father and son, and yet, though the elder person was as simply clad as the younger, and as simple in manner too, he had an indescribable air of one who knew the world, and who would not have felt abashed at the governor's dinner table, or in King William's court, where it's possible that his affairs should call him thither. But the only thing about him that could be fixed upon as remarkable was his staff, which bore the likeness of a great black snake, so curiously wrought that it might almost be seen to twist and wriggle itself like a living serpent. This, of course, must have been an ocular deception, assisted by the uncertain light. Okay, so the description of this man is that he's a man in his 50s, dressed similar to Goodman Brown, probably in the same social status as Goodman Brown. Nothing that different except for he seems like someone that maybe has some importance to him and could be seen with great men of the time. They mention King William and the governor. And then he has a strange staff, a walking stick, that is in the shape of a big black snake. And it almost seems like it's wriggling and moving snake-wise, but Goodman Brown says this is just a deception of his eyes, something that, and the night light. All right. Page 29. Come, Goodman Brown, cried his fellow traveler, this is a dull place for the beginning of a journey. Take my staff if you are soon weary. Friend, said the other, exchanging his slow pace for a full stop, having kept having kept covenant, I believe that's one of yours. No, covenant is a promise. So having kept promise by meeting thee here, it is my purpose now to return whence I came. I have scruples touching the matter thou wilt stop. Scruples are like problems, issues. Sayest thou so? Replied he of the serpent, smiling apart. Let us walk on, nevertheless, reasoning as we go, and if I convince thee not, thou shalt turn back. We are but a little way in the forest. So they're talking about something. Goodman Brown's like, I've seen you, I've kept my promise, let me turn back. The other man's like, no, let's walk on and let me talk to you. And if I can't convince you of something, then I'll just let you go. too far, exclaimed the good man, unconsciously resuming his walk. My father never went into these woods on such an errand, nor his father before him. We have been a race of honest men and good Christians since the days of the martyrs, and shall I be the first of the name of Brown that ever took this path and kept? So, um, again, whatever deed they are talking about, Goodman Brown is a little ashamed, and he's saying, my father never would have done this, my grandfather never would have done this, and I'm embarrassed because what if I'm the first one in the family to do such, well, we don't know what it is yet, but something evil. Such company thou wouldst say, observed the elder person, interpreting his pause. Well said, Goodman Brown. I have been as well acquainted with your family as with ever a young among the Puritans. And that's no trifle to say. I helped your grandfather, the constable, when he lashed the Quaker woman so smartly through the streets of Salem, and it was I that brought your father a pitch-pine knot kindled at my own hearth to set fire to an Indian village in King Philip's War. They were my good friends, both, and many a pleasant walk have we had along this path, and returned merrily after midnight. I would fain be friends with you for their sake. So the traveler says, oh no, I know your family. I've known them for a long time. I helped your grandfather when he lashed, meaning whipped, a Quaker woman so smartly, like viciously whipped, through the streets of Salem. And then I brought your father the pitch pine knot, like kindled at my own hearth, so like the fire that he used to burn down an Indian village in King Philip's War. And he says, I would feign means fake, I would fake being friends with you for their sake. So he's saying that I knew them better than you could believe, and for their sake is why I'm even seeing you. If it be as thou sayest, replied Goodman Brown, I marvel they never spoke of these matters, or verily I marvel not, seeing that the least rumor of the sort would have driven them from New England. We are a people of prayer and good works to boot, and abide no such wickedness. So Goodman Brown's saying that's not true. If any of that was true, we would have been ran out of town, and we weren't, so we're a good family. We have a good reputation. Wickedness or not, said the traveler with the twisted staff, I have a very general acquaintance here in New England. The deacons of many a church have drunk the communion wine with me. The selectmen of divers towns make me their chairman, and the majority of the great and general court are firm supporters of my interest. The governor and I, too, but these are state secrets. So he's saying, you may or may not believe me, but it's not just your family I'm associated with. Deacons of many church. So if you remember that way back to when we were talking about the crucible, the church and state were not separated in this time. And if you were part of the church, like you deacon, you had a lot of power. And the traveler is saying, I have drunk communion with the deacons, so we are in communication. Selectmen of divers towns make me their chairman, so like he has a lot of influence in towns. And the majority of the great and general court, so like judges, are firm supporters of my interests. So he's in cahoots, for lack of a better word, with all of these types of powerful people. Can this be so? Cried Goodman Brown, with a stare of amazement at his undisturbed companion. Howbeit, I have nothing to do with the governor and council. They have their own ways, and are no rule for a simple husbandman like me. But were I to go on with thee, how should I meet the eye of that good old man, our minister at Salem village? Oh, his voice would make me tremble both Sabbath day and lecture day. So he's again saying, well, is that so? Well, I have nothing to do with them. But if I continue talking with you, how can I face these holy people like my minister, the good minister, who I fear? Thus far the elder traveler had listened with due gravity, but now burst into a fit of irrepressible mirth. So he burst out laughing, shaking himself so violently that his snake-like staff actually seemed to wriggle in sympathy. "Ha, ha, ha!" shouted he again and again, then composing himself, "Well, go on, Goodman Brown, go on, but prithee don't kill me with laughing." "Well, then, to end the matter at once," said Goodman Brown, considerably nettled, "there is my wife, Faith. It would break her dear little heart, and I'd rather break my own." "Nay, if that be the case," answered the other, "even go thy ways, Goodman Brown. I would not for 20 old women like the one hobbling before us that Faith should come to any harm." So again, the traveler laughed when he's talking about the minister, implying that the minister is not who you think. And then um, Goodman Brown says, "Well, if that's the truth, Faith, my wife, she will keep me from whatever this agreement is." And Goodman Brown says, "Well, um, at this point, there's an old woman walking crossing the road in front of him, and the traveler says, I wouldn't for 20 of her, a woman like her, um, hurt your faith." And again, circle that faith, because we're going to look at faith in two different, this is page 29, second column, 1, 2, 3, 4 paragraphs down, 5 paragraphs down. "Nay, if that be the case," answered the other, "even go thy ways, Goodman Brown. I would not for 20 old women like the one hobbling before us that faith should come to any harm." Faith his wife, or his faith in what? All right. As he spoke, he pointed his staff at a female figure on the path, in whom Goodman Brown recognized a very pious, pious means very religious, a very religious and exemplary dame. Dame is a woman, who had taught him his catechism in youth, and was still his moral and spiritual adviser, jointly with the minister and Deacon Gookin. I don't know if you know the catechism. It's part of some Christian sects, um, and it's just something you learn before your communion, mostly for Catholics. So this woman that's walking before them is the one who taught him. He's probably part of the Catholic sect of Christianity. So she is the one that taught him his catechism and was a spiritual advisor. "A marvel, truly, that Goody Cloyce should be so far in the wilderness at nightfall," said he. "But with your leave, friend, I shall take a cut through the woods until we have left this Christian woman behind. Being a stranger to you, she might ask whom I was consorting with and whither I was going." "Be it so," said his fellow traveler. "Betake you to the woods, and let me keep the path." Accordingly, the young man turned aside, but took care to watch his companion, who advanced softly along the road until he had come within a staff's length of the old dame. She, meanwhile, was making the best of her way with singular speed for so aged a woman, and mumbling some indistinct words, a prayer, doubtless, as she went. The traveler put forth his staff and touched her withered neck with what seemed like the serpent's tail. "The devil!" screamed the pious old lady. "Then Goody Cloyce knows her old friend," observed the traveler, confronting her and leaning on the riding stick. "Ah, forsooth! And is it your worship indeed?" cried the good dame. "Yea, truly it is, and in the very image of my old gossip, Goodman Brown, the grandfather of the silly fellow that now is. But would your worship believe me? My broomstick hath strangely disappeared, stolen, as I suspect, by the unhanged witch, Goody Corey, and that, too, when I was all anointed with the juice of smallage and cinquefoil and wolfsbane, mingled with fine wheat and the fat of a new-born babe," said the shape of old Goodman Brown. "Ah, your worship knows the recipe," cried the old lady, cackling aloud. "So, as I was saying, being all ready for the meeting, and no horse to ride on, I made up my mind to foot it, for they tell me there is a nice young man to be taken into communion tonight. But now your good worship will lend me your arm, and we shall be there in a twinkling." "That can hardly be," answered her friend. "I may not spare you my arm, Goody Cloyce, but here is my staff, if you will." So saying, he threw it down at her feet, where perhaps it assumed life, being one of the rods which its owner had formerly lent to the Egyptian magi. Of this fact, however, Goodman Brown could not take cognizance. Cognizance is one of your words, perception or knowledge or awareness. He had cast up his eyes in astonishment, and looking down again, beheld neither Goody Cloyse nor the serpentine staff, but his fellow traveller alone, who waited for him as calmly as if nothing had happened. So we find out, if you hadn't guessed it, that the traveler that he met was the devil. And the the woman they came across, this lady that he held in such a high position in his mind, she was a holy religious woman, knows the devil and is on her way to some sort of night meeting. And the devil lent her his staff, and she took it and walked away. And Goodman Brown is standing back, kind of shocked. "That old woman taught me my catechism," said the young man, and there was a word of meaning in this simple comment. They continued to walk onward, while the elder traveller exhorted his companion to make good speed and persevere in the path, discoursing so aptly that his arguments seemed rather to spring up in the bosom of his auditor than to be suggested by himself. As they went, he plucked a branch of maple to serve for a walking stick, and began to strip it of the twigs and little boughs, which were wet with evening dew. The moment his fingers touched them, they became strangely withered and dried up as the weak sunshine. Thus the pair proceeded, at a good free pace, until suddenly, in a gloomy hollow of the road, Goodman Brown sat himself down on the stump of a tree and refused to go any farther. "Friend," said he, stubbornly, "my mind is made up. Not another step will I budge in this errand. What if a wretched old woman do choose to go to the devil, when I thought she was going to heaven? Is that any reason why I should quit my dear faith and go after her?" Again, mention of faith, page 30, second column, first big paragraph. He's saying, okay, so this, I'm not going to continue with you. Yes, it shocked me that this woman tricked me, but does that mean I should give up my faith? And he's faith, capital F, talking about his wife, and go after her, meaning I should, keep going with you, leave my wife behind and follow this woman. He's like, no, I'm not going to do that. At this time, we can also start thinking about faith on a level of faith in God. All these instances of people he thought were pure had not been, but he has not yet given up his faith in God, or possibly his wife faith. "You will think better of this by and by," said his acquaintance composedly. "Sit here and rest yourself a while, and when you feel like moving again, there is my staff to help you along." Without more words, he threw his companion the maple stick, and was speedily out of sight, as if he had vanished into a deepening gloom. The young man sat a few moments by the roadside, applauding himself greatly, and thinking with how clear a conscience he should meet the minister in his morning walk, nor shrink from the eye of good old Deacon Goodman. So, pause right in the middle there. He's saying he's really proud of himself. He's saying when he sees the minister on his walk in the morning, or when he sees Deacon Goodman, this religious figure, he won't be ashamed because he has turned down following the devil, and something he'll be proud of. And what calm sleep would be his that very night, which was to have been spent so wickedly, but so purely and sweetly now in the arms of faith. Amidst these pleasant and praiseworthy meditations, Goodman Brown heard the tramp of horses along the road, and deemed it advisable to conceal himself within the verge of the forest, conscious of the guilty purpose that had brought him thither, though now so happily turned from it. So he hears the sound of horses, and he's like, I've got to hide, because I don't want anybody knowing that I was here at night on this evil deed. And he's happy that he decided not to go through with it, but he's still a little embarrassed, so he's going to hide from whoever is coming. On came the hoof tramps, and the voices of riders, two grave old voices, conversing soberly as they drew near. These mingled sounded these mingled sounds appeared to pass along the road, within a few yards of the young man's hiding place, but, owing doubtless to the depth of the gloom at the particular spot, neither the travelers nor their steeds were visible. So he could hear them, but he couldn't see them. It was too dark. Though their figures brushed the small boughs by the wayside, it could not be seen that they intercepted, even for a moment, the faint gleam from the strip of bright sky athwart which they must have passed. Goodman Brown alternately crouched and stood on tiptoe, pulling aside the branches and thrusting forth his head as far as he durst, without discerning so much as a shadow. It vexed him the more because he could have sworn, were such a thing possible, that he recognized the voices of the minister and Deacon Gookin, jogging along quietly as they were wont to do, when bound at some ordination or ecclesiastical council. So he can't see, but he's confused because the voices are the very holy men that he looks up to, and he's wondering why they would be out in the woods in the middle of the night. It can't be anything good. While yet within hearing, one of the riders stopped to pluck a switch. Page 31. Of the two, Reverend Sir, said the voice like the deacon's, I had rather miss an ordination dinner than tonight's meeting. They tell me that some of our community are to be here from Falmouth and beyond, and others from Connecticut and Rhode Island, besides several of the Indian powwows, who, after their fashion, know almost as much deviltry as the best of us. Moreover, there is a goodly young woman to be taken into communion. So they're talking about whatever assembly is going on tonight, and they're excited because someone is to be taken into communion. But this is not a church communion. This is a dark communion. Mighty well, Deacon Gookin, replied the solemn old tones of the minister. Spur up, or we shall be late. Nothing can be done, you know, until I get on the ground. The hoofs clattered again, and the voices, talking so strangely in the empty air, passed on through the forest, where no church had ever been gathered, or solitary Christian prayed. Whither then could these holy men be journeying so deep into the heathen wilderness? Young Goodman Brown caught hold of a tree for support, being ready to sink down on the ground, faint and overburdened with the heavy sickness of his heart. He looked up to the sky, doubting whether there really was heaven above him. Yet there was the blue arch, and the stars brightened in it. So again, two people who he had the impression were holy have let him down again, and he's starting to look up and wonder if there's really a heaven. With heaven above and faith below, I will yet stand firm against the devil, cried Goodman Brown. While he still gazed toward into the deep arch of the firmament, and had lifted his hands to pray, a cloud, though no wind was stirring, hurried across the zenith and hid the brightening stars. The blue sky was still visible, except directly overhead, where the black mass of cloud was sweeping swiftly northward. Aloft in the air, as if from the depths of the cloud, came a confused and doubtful sound of voices. Once the listener fancied that he could distinguish the accents of townspeople of his own, men and women, both pious and ungodly, many of whom he had met at the communion table, and had seen others rioting at the tavern. So he follows the voices, and he starts to recognize these as his friends and neighbors and people around the town. Some he thought very good, some not so much. The next moment, so indistinct were the sounds, he doubted whether he had heard aught but the murmur of the old forest, whispering without a wind. Then came a stronger swell of these familiar tones, heard daily in the sunshine at Salem village. But never until now, from a cloud of night, there was one voice of a young woman, uttering lamentations, yet with an uncertain sorrow, and entreating for some favor, which perhaps it would grieve her to obtain, and all the unseen multitude, both saints and sinners, seemed to encourage her onward. Faith! Shouted Goodman Brown in a voice of agony and desperation, and the echoes of the forest mocked him, crying, Faith! Faith! As if bewildered wretches were seeking her all through the wilderness. The cry of grief, rage, and terror was yet piercing the night when the unhappy husband held his breath for a response. There was a scream, drowned immediately in a louder murmur of voices, fading into far-off laughter as the dark cloud swept away, leaving the clear and silent sky above. Goodman Brown. But something fluttered lightly down through the air and caught on the branch of a tree. The young man seized it and beheld a pink ribbon. My faith is gone, cried he, after one stupefied moment. There is no good on earth, and sin is but a name. Come, devil, for to thee is this world given. All right, pause there. So, after all these terrible things he's witnessing, he's still had faith in God and faith in his wife. He said he's going to stay faithful because she was keeping him grounded. And then, as he approaches this assembly, he sees her. His wife is there, which is a huge betrayal for him. And the pink ribbon, this ribbon of innocence, of what he's connected with her, has flown out of her hair, and it kind of symbolizes that his faith is gone. He no longer has faith in her because she's at this evil place, and he has no longer faith in God. And maddened with despair, so that he laughed loud and long, the Goodman Brown grasped his staff and set forth again, at such a rate that he seemed to fly along the forest path rather than to walk or run. The road grew wilder and drearier and more faintly traced, and vanished at length, leaving him in the heart of the dark wilderness, still rushing onward with the instinct that guides mortal men to evil. The whole forest was peopled with frightful sounds, the creaking of the trees, the howling of the wild beasts, and the yell of Indians, while sometimes the wind tolled like a distant church bell, and sometimes gave a broad roar around the traveler, as if all nature were laughing him to scorn. But he himself, the chief of horror of the scene, and shrank not from its other horrors. Ha ha ha! roared Goodman Brown when the wind laughed at him. Let us hear which will laugh loudest. Think not to frighten me with your deviltry. Come witch, come wizard, come Indian powwow, come devil himself, and here comes Goodman Brown. You may as well fear him as he fear you. In truth, all through the haunted forest there could be nothing more frightful than the figure of Goodman Brown. On he flew among the black pines, brandishing his staff with frenzied gestures, now giving vent to an inspiration of horrid blasphemy, and now shouting forth such laughter as set on the echoes of the forest, laughing like demons around him. The fiend in his own shape is less hideous than when he rages in the breast of a man. Thus sped the demonic on his course, until, quivering among the trees, he saw a red light before him, as when the felled trunks and branches of a clearing had been set on fire and thrown up their lurid blaze against the sky at the hour of midnight. He paused, in lull of the tempest that had driven him onward, and heard the swell of what seemed a hymn, rolling solemnly from a distance, with the weight of many voices. He knew the tune. It was a familiar one in the choir of the village meeting-house. The verse died heavily away, and was lengthened by a chorus, not of human voices, but of all the sounds of the benighted wilderness, pealing in awful harmony together. Goodman Brown cried out, and his cry was lost to his own ear, but its unison was the cry of the desert. In the interval of silence he stole forward until the light glared full upon his eyes. At one extremity of the open space, hemmed in by the dark wall of the forest, arose a rock, bearing some rude natural resemblance either to an altar or a pulpit, and surrounded by 4 blazing pines, the tops aflame, their stems untouched, like candles at an evening meeting. I'll pause again there. So he has discovered his wife is among one of the people that's supposed to go to this assembly. He goes into a fit of rage and just kind of runs through the forest until he comes across this clearing. And in the middle is an altar, and there are 4 trees in flames surrounding this altar. The mass of foliage that had overgrown the summit of the rock was all on fire, blazing high into the night and fitfully illuminating the whole field. Each pendant twig and leafy festoon was in a blaze. As the red light arose and fell, a numerous congregation alternately shone forth, then disappeared in shadow, and again grew, as it were out of the darkness, peopling the heart of the solitary woods at once. A grave and dark-clad company, quoth Goodman Brown. And true, they were such. Among them, quivering to and fro between gloom and splendor, appeared faces that would have seen next day at the council board of the province, and others which, Sabbath after Sabbath, looked devoutly heavenward and benignly over the crowded pews, from the holiest pulpits of the land. Some affirmed that the lady of the governor was there. At least there was high dames well known to her, and wives of honored husbands and widows, a great multitude, and ancient maidens of an excellent repute, and fair young girls, who trembled lest their mothers should espy them. Either the sudden gleams of light flashing over the obscure field bedazzled Goodman Brown, or he recognized a score of the church members of Salem village, famous for the especial sanctity. Good old Deacon Gookin had arrived, and waited at the skirts of the venerable saint, his reverend pastor. But irreverently consorting with these grave, reputable, and pious people, these elders of the church, these chaste dames and dewy virgins, there were men of dissolute lives and women of spotted fame, wretches given over to all mean and filthy vice, and suspected even of horrid crimes. It was strange to see that the good shrank not from the wicked, nor were the sinners abashed by the saints. Scattered also among their pale-faced enemies were the Indian priests or powwows, who had often scared their native forests with more hideous incantations than any known to English witchcraft. So he sees the full splendor of this assembly, and the people there are of all walks of life. There are famous, rich, respected men and women. There are religious, pious people, and then there are people known for committing crimes and evil deeds and with terrible reputations, and they're all communicating with each other. They're not afraid of each other or avoiding each other. They're all together in this one place. But where is faith, thought Goodman Brown, and as hope came in his heart, he trembled. So he looks around, but he doesn't see faith. So he has a little bit of hope in him. Another verse of the hymn arose, Ish'Allah, a slow and mournful strain, such as the pious love, but joined to words which expressed all that our nature can conceive of sin, and darkly hinted at far more. Unfathomable to mere mortals is the lore of fiends. Verse after verse was sung, and still the chorus of the desert swelled between like the deepest tone of a mighty organ. And with the final peal of the dreadful anthem, there came a sound, as if the roaring wind and rushing streams, and howling beasts, and every other voice of the unconcerted wilderness, were mingling and according with the voice of guilty man in homage to the Prince of all. The 4 blazing pines threw up a loftier flame, and obscurely discovered shapes and visage of horror on the smoke wreaths above the impious assembly. At the same moment, the fire on the rock shot readily forth and formed a glowing arch above its base, where now appeared a figure. With reverence be it spoken, the figure bore no slight similitude, both in garb and manner, to some grave divine of the New England churches. "Bring forth the converts," cried the voice that echoed through a field and rolled into the forest. Converts, people who have converted to thinking or religion. So whoever this is calling forth the people who have now converted to this assembly, which is following the devil. At the word, Goodman Brown stepped forth from the shadow of the trees and approached the congregation, with whom he felt a loathful brotherhood, but a sympathy of all that was wicked in his heart. He could have well nigh sworn that the shape of his own dead father beckoned him to advance, looking downward from the smoke wreath, while a woman, with dim features of despair, threw out her hand to warn him back. Was it his mother? So he's seeing what he thinks is his dead father calling him over, come join, and he thinks he sees his mother also dead, singling him not to come. But he had no power to retreat one step, nor to resist, even in thought, when the minister and good old Deacon Goodkin seized his arms and led him to the blazing rock. Thither came also the slender form of a veiled female, led between Goody Cloyce, the pious teacher of the catechism, and Martha Carrier, who had received the devil's promise to be queen of hell. A rampant hag was she, and there stood the proselytes beneath the canopy of fire. Welcome, my children, said the dark figure, to the communion of your race. Ye have found thus young your nature and your destiny, my children. Look behind you. They turned, and flashing forth, as it were, in a sheet of flame, the fiend worshippers were seen. The smile of welcome gleamed darkly on every visage. There, resumed the sable form, are all whom ye have reverenced from youth. Ye deem them holier than yourselves, and shrank from your own sin, contrasting it with their lives of righteousness and prayerful aspirations heavenward. Yet here are they all in my worshipping assembly. This night it shall be granted you to know their secret deeds, how hoary-bearded elders of the church have whispered wanton words to the young maids of their households, how many a woman eager for widow's weeds had given her husband a drink at bedtime and let him sleep his last sleep in her bosom, how beardless youths have made haste to inherit their father's wealth, and how fair damsels, blush not, sweet ones, have dug little graves in the garden and bidden me the sole guest to an infant's funeral. Okay, that's a lot. Let's break that part down. So the devil is introducing his new converts, and he says, look at all these people sitting here at this congregation that you thought were holier than art thou, and but all these people you thought holy are here, and what have they done? Where it's at the beginning of this big long paragraph on page 33 on the left-hand column. This night it shall be granted you to know their secret deeds. So he's saying, let me tell you how they all ended up here. How hoary-bearded elders of the church have whispered wanton words to the young maids of their households. So this is indicating that some of these church elders have whispered inappropriate words and possibly done inappropriate deeds to people, to maids of their household. How women, eager for widow's weeds, have given her husband a drink at bedtime and let him sleep his last in her bosom. It's implying that some people here some women have poisoned their husbands in order to get rid of them. How beardless youths have made haste to inherit their father's wealth. So how young men have killed their fathers in order to inherit their father's wealth. How fair damsels, blush not, sweet ones, have dug little graves in the garden and bidden me the sole guest to an infant's funeral. It's implying that women had sex out of marriage, were pregnant, and aborted the children or lost the children and buried them silently, because in this time period it was illegal for women to have sex outside of marriage. So these are all the evil deeds, he says, that have gotten all these people at this assembly. By the sympathy of your human hearts for sin ye shall scent out all the places, whether in church, bedchamber, street, field, or forest, where crime has been committed, and shall exult to behold the whole earth one stain of guilt, one mighty blood spot. Far more than this, it shall be yours to penetrate in every bosom the deep mystery of sin, the fountain of all wicked arts, and which inexhaustibly supplies more evil impulses than human power. Then my power, at its utmost, can make manifest in deeds. And now, my children, look upon each other. They did so, and by the blaze of the hell-kindled torches, the wretched man beheld his fate, and the wife of her husband, trembling before that unhallowed altar. So someone has revealed faith is there. "Lo, there ye stand, my children," said the figure in a deep and solemn tone, almost sad with its despairing awfulness, as if his once angelic nature could yet mourn for our miserable race. Depending upon one another's hearts, ye had still hoped that virtue were not all a dream. Now are ye undeceived. Evil is the nature of mankind. Evil must be your only happiness. Welcome again, my children, to the communion of your race. Welcome, repeated the fiend worshippers in one cry of despair and triumph. And there they stood, the only pair, as it seemed, who were yet hesitating on the verge of wickedness in the dark world. A basin was hollowed naturally in the rock. Did it contain water reddened by the lurid light, or was it blood, or perchance a liquid flame? Herein did the shape of evil dip his hand and prepare to lay the mark of baptism upon their foreheads, that they might be partakers of the mystery of sin, more conscious of the secret guilt of others, both in deed and thought, than they could now be of their own. The husband cast one look at his pale wife, and Faith at him. What polluted wretches would the next glance show them to each other, shuddering alike at what they disclosed and what they saw? "Faith, Faith," cried the husband, "look up to heaven, and resist the wicked one." Whether Faith obeyed he knew not. Hardly had he spoken when he found himself amid calm night and solitude, listening to a roar of the wind which died heavily away through the forest. He staggered against a rock and felt a chill and damp, while a hanging twig that had been all on fire besprinkled his cheek with the coldest dew. Okay, let's stop here. So, the two new converts were supposed to be him and his wife Faith, and they were supposed to be baptized. However, right when Goodman Brown yelled, "Faith, Faith, look up to heaven and resist the wicked one," he kind of jumps out of it and wakes up in the middle of the forest alone. So, the implication here is either he either was kind of kicked out and it continued, or it was all a dream. It's unsure, because he woke up and the same plants that were on fire. Now it was morning time and the dew was falling off of them. The next morning, young Goodman Brown came slowly into the street of Salem village, staring around him like a bewildered man. The good old minister was taking a walk along the graveyard to get an appetite for breakfast and meditate his sermon, and bestowed a blessing as he passed on Goodman Brown. He shrank from the venerable saint as if to avoid an anathema. Old Deacon Gookin was at domestic worship, and the holy words of his prayer were heard through an open window. "What God doth the wizard pray to?" quoth Goodman Brown. So he's seeing all these people he saw in this dream, or maybe not dream, last night, and he's disgusted with them. Goody Cloyce, an excellent old Christian, stood in the early sunshine at her own lattice, catechizing a little girl who had brought her a pint of morning milk. Goodman Brown snatched away the child as from the grasp of a fiend himself. Turning the corner by the meeting house, he spied the head of Faith, with the pink ribbons, gazing anxiously forth, and bursting into such joy at sight of him that she skipped along the street and almost kissed her husband before the whole village. But Goodman Brown looked sternly and sadly into her face and passed on without greeting. Had Goodman Brown fallen asleep in the forest and only dreamed a wild dream of a witch meeting? Be it so, if you will, but alas, it was a dream of evil omen for young Goodman Brown. A stern, a sad, a darkly meditative, a distrustful, if not desperate man did he become from the night of that fearful dream. On the Sabbath day, when the congregation were singing a holy psalm, he could not listen, because an anthem of sin rushed loudly upon his ear and drowned all the blessing strain. When the minister spoke from the pulpit with power and fervid eloquence, and with his hand on the open Bible of the sacred truths of our religion, and of saint-like lives and triumphant deaths, and of future bliss or misery unutterable. Then did Goodman Brown turn pale, dreading lest the roof should thunder down upon the grey blasphemer and his hearers. Often, walking suddenly at midnight, he shrank from the bosom of faith, and at morning or evening tide, when the family knelt down at prayer, he scowled and muttered to himself, and gazed sternly at his wife, and turned away. And when he had lived long, and was borne to his grave a hoary corpse, followed by Faith, an aged woman, and children and grandchildren, a goodly procession, besides neighbors not a few, they carved no hopeful verse upon his tombstone, for his dying hour was gloom. The end. So, after he woke up, he wasn't sure if what he saw was real or not, but it changed his entire life. Let's say it's a dream, everybody he dreamed in that dream, he couldn't trust them. He wouldn't go near them. He lost faith in his wife, and then he grew, and when he died as an old man, no one said anything nice on his gravestone because he died a miserable old man. So let's look at some of your questions. All right, number 1. Where is Brown's destination at the beginning of the story, and why does Brown continue even if he knows his intentions are evil? Well, we know he was going to meet somebody, but he says, so we don't know for what purpose though. And then he says he knows it's bad, but after tonight he plans on being good, so it's okay. Why does the traveler say, ha ha ha, well go on, Goodman Brown, go on, but prithee, don't kill me with laughing? And what does this reveal about Brown? Well, we said earlier the traveler says this because Goodman Brown is saying how good all these people are, and the traveler, the devil, knows that all these people are actually under his rule. He's like, don't kill me with laughing, all these people are evil. But what does it say about Goodman Brown? That he's very naive. He doesn't know much about the people in town. What does Goodman Brown find at the meeting? I think you could answer that one. How does the meeting change Brown? That's the end of it. What does it change in his personality and how he lives? How does Brown exclamation of my faith is gone work on more than one level? I believe I answered this. So literally, my faith is gone. Where did she go in this situation? And then what figurative faith is gone? His faith in what? All right. Symbolism, we talked about fakes, pink ribbons, symbolizing innocence. The traveler, symbolizing the devil. The serpent staff, think Adam and Eve. How do you think, think of this? Who does the devil offer the staff to? And think of it similar to the story of Adam and Eve. Where's the parallel there? What do you think that symbolizes? And the black mass of clouds, it's hanging over them as he gets closer and closer to the assembly. So what do you think that means? Number 7, select an element of contrast in the story and discuss its purpose. For example, you could contrast light and dark, good and evil. Some sort of contrast there, opposites. 8, Hawthorne uses much ambiguity in the story. What purpose does it serve? Ambiguity means something that's not completely clear. For example, the word faith is ambiguous. Why do you think that he used it in that way? You could choose something else too if you don't want to stick with faith. 9, that's an opinion. 10, opinion. 11, what external forces help Goodman Brown define himself? External forces are things that you can't control outside of you. So outside sources. What outside of himself is happening that helps him define himself as he continues on in the story? And then what external, 12, your opinion, and 13, your opinion. All right. If you have questions or need help, please email me or text me. You know how to reach me. Otherwise, I hope this helps. And then once we have this done, you're pretty much on spring break. So you guys will be dropping these packets off to me soon. And then when you come to pick up the second packet, we're going to be starting the 1920s and the Great Gatsby. Look, you got out of this test. So, however, some of these are going to be graded as test scores. So make sure you do them and you do them well, please. Again, if you have questions, you know how to reach me. And have a great day.